this first appendix video to the War of the Rings series, I'll cover the origins of the Last Alliance and the greater story of that war itself. This video is aimed to be a companion to the video on the War of the Last Alliance scenario, an all-new scenario introduced into the War of the Ring mode by the critically acclaimed Age of the Ring mod, and the only time this has ever been done that I know of. And this video is the first of two to cover the story of the Last Alliance to better understand the scenario itself. This is an incredibly exciting scenario, as it goes the full gamut to revolutionize what can be done with a War of the Ring scenario if developers really put their backs into it. Nothing like it has been done in BFME games anywhere else, at least not as far as I know. But it has the potential to be a bit confusing or jarring. One of the great reasons for this is that it introduces a lot of new characters that were not in the films or the Lord of the Rings books proper, but characters which appear only in posthumously published works by Tolkien. In these works, which contain material such as notes or incomplete narratives, it is revealed how he had been working on expanding the stories already published. And The Last Alliance is one of those stories. Given these inclusions in AOTR's War of the Rings scenario, any players unfamiliar with these deep cuts, such as those who know only the films, may feel a bit jarred by so much new content without proper context. That's what this video is for. Something else about the way The Last Alliance is portrayed in the films is that you don't get a good sense of who the characters are. You don't know where they come from or what they've gone through, as Tolkien was building upon an awful lot of material with those characters. It's my hope that this video will help to better ground you in the main characters of that event, such as Elendil, Gil-galad, and Isildur especially. In light of the various expansions, the story of the War of the Last Alliance is a tale worth retelling here to help better understand the new characters in the scenario and some of the deeper gameplay value added based off the expansions to the books. The Last Alliance is only briefly shown in the films and with only a minimum of context, and not even quite the correct context at that. The films deviate a good deal from the Lord of the Rings books proper, even apart from the other works just mentioned. Here you'll understand more about Elendil, the father of Isildur, who took the One Ring, and Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves who allied with King Elendil. You'll also understand more about the Elves as a people, and the people of Elendil and his son Isildur, where they come from and how precisely they were at war with the Dark Lord Sauron. For those dipping their toes into these waters for the first time, you'll also be introduced to Elendil's other son, Anarion, who played a pivotal role in the formation of Gondor alongside his brother Isildur, while Elendil founded the Kingdom of Arnor in the north. And you'll understand who the new characters are that are introduced into this scenario: King Durin of the Dwarves, Oropher, father of Thranduil, father of Legolas of the Fellowship of the Ring, and Amdir, king of the Forest of Loranond, later known as Lothlorien, and his son Amroth. So those who know only the films may be interested to understand the story as laid out by the author, as some important details are left out which this scenario delves into. Always good to have a better appreciation of these things anyways. That being said, there's important background info to set the stage to best understand the context for the event as well as the character's involvement. Background that the films don't even touch on, but which is critical to understanding the War of the Last Alliance. It's not nearly as simple as the films make it out to be. The War of the Last Alliance was really the end of a series of diverse conflicts and wars with the Dark Lord over the 3.5 millennia of the Second Age. It was not, as the films strongly imply, a relatively immediate response to the crisis concerning the One Ring and Sauron taking over the world, as though it were all in the span of a few years. Starting with the War of the Elves and Sauron some 2,000 years before the creation of the Last Alliance, the more ancient war was the direct response to the One Ring, which lasted for around 8 years, during which time Sauron took over virtually all of Middle-earth, with the fall of one of the greatest elven kingdoms, Eregion, and the deaths of many of the greatest of the Eldar and elves, such as Celebrimbor, who forged the Rings of Power. It was a time so dark and hopeless that even the dwarves of Khazad-dûm under one of the Durins closed their doors to the outside world in hopes of protecting themselves, And even Elrond, herald of the High King of the Noldoran Elves, Gil-galad, retreated and founded Rivendell as a refuge. But Sauron was finally pushed back by Gil-galad in a force unlooked for. The elves under his dominion, the Noldor, were aided throughout much of that war and in much of the following 2 millennia of the Second Age by the greatest kingdom of men the world would ever see, Numenor. The Númenóreans were a great seafaring race of men, second to none in their nautical prowess. In fact, were it not for its intervention, the Noldor would certainly have been destroyed, and the 3 rings they possessed and hid would have been taken. Because of the alliance of the Númenóreans and the Noldor, Sauron was pushed out of the Westlands, which had peace for roughly 1,500 years before the last alliance came to be. And because of the Númenóreans, the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor would later be made throughout Middle-earth, with many of its most iconic cities and fortresses, like Minas Tirith and Osgiliath, being made towards the end of this age. Because of his humiliating defeat by the Númenóreans, Sauron bore a special hatred for them and all their descendants ever after. In fact, it was this people Aragorn was directly descended from, and thus was a source of great hope for the free peoples of Middle-earth, and of great fear for the Dark Lord. But for all his hatred of this people, Sauron could not assail their kingdom by force. For Numenor was a great island far out into the western seas, created by the Valar and in sight of Valinor, and so blessed by them. The people of Numenor were known as the Elf Friends, and were in friendship with them for thousands of years. Their first king was Elros, brother of Elrond, half-elven himself. Its long line of kings being descended from the greatest heroes of the First Age, these kings were gifted directly by the angelic Valar with a span of years to live many lives that of lesser men of Middle-earth, living several hundred years. Known in afterdays as the Sea Kings, they became the greatest maritime power in history, making ships unrivaled by any other race, even the Elves, sailing across the seas of all the known world, exploring every land they discovered and befriending all different peoples far and wide, bringing the light and wisdom born out of their kinship with the Elves and their friendship with the Valar into the wide world. Only to the seas and the land west of Numenor were they not allowed to sail, where the realm of Valinor, the Undying Lands, lay. These lands were forbidden by the Valar, lest the Númenóreans be tempted by that immortality, which they could not have. That they would eventually die, but the Elves had immortality, and could freely go to Valinor to be forever with the Valar, was at first for many generations of men understood and accepted by the Númenóreans. The fate and nature of either men or elves could not be changed, save by the express permission of Ilúvatar, the One, the supreme ruler of heaven and earth, and they accepted this. He it was, through unique circumstances and blessing, who changed the nature of Luthien Tinuviel, elven wife of Beren, to be immortal out of love for Beren, and who changed their daughter Elwing's nature to that of the elves, as well as her own husband Eärendil, the great mariner who sailed to Valinor and beseeched the Valar for their aid against Morgoth, ending with his downfall at their hands. Immortal before his nature was changed, Eärendil was fated to sail the heavens forever with the Silmaril, one of the greatest elven jewels upon the prow of his ship, and became the most beloved star of the elves, the light of which was captured by Galadriel's phial she gave to the ring-bearer Frodo millennia later. And it was Ilúvatar who changed the nature of both Elrond and his brother Elros, who were the half-elven children of Eärendil and Elwing. Elrond chose to be of the elven kind, and Elros chose to be immortal, the first king of Numenor and most revered by the Númenóreans. The Númenóreans, as exemplified by their first king Elros and his faithfulness to Ilúvatar and the Valar, for long generations accepted and understood their nature. Their kings had the gift that when they knew their time on earth was at an end, they could lay down and give their spirits freely back to the one who had given it. Thus could the Númenóreans themselves. Thousands of years later, when Aragorn Elisar's time came to an end, he was granted the same gift, being descended from the Númenórean faithful, and gave up his spirit willingly and in peace. And so too did his wife Arwen Undomiel, who also had the choice of the half-elven to become immortal by the permission of Iluvatar, as she laid herself down to sleep forever in Lothlorien. But this choice was given only to very select few individuals, not whole peoples, so the Numenorian kings and queens, all descended from Elros, could not choose their fate, they being of the race of men because of Elros' choice. And Elrond's own 3 children had to make the same choice as he once did. For the first 2 millennia of the Second Age, though, in this long span of time the Numenorians were content with the separate dooms of elves and men, that elves should remain forever on the earth, answering the summons of the Valar to return to Valinor, which was elven home, while men should die and leave the earth forever. But by the end of the second millennium of the Second Age, the shadow had started to fall upon even Numenor. They remained content even while whispers of discontent and resentment of Elros' choice weighed on their hearts, even whilst remaining the most blessed of all men in the light of Valinor and in their abiding friendship with the elves. Over the millennia, though, the Numenorians became discontented with this ban and fearful of their own mortality. Their own longer lifespan only furthered this discontentment, until in the last days of King Tar-Atanamir, at the beginning of the second millennium of the Second Age, that the fear of death became so overpowering that the king became the first to not lay down his own life willingly at the end of his old age, so that his life was taken from him perforce in his dotage, witless and unmanned as so many of the lesser peoples of Middle-earth. And so it was also for those who followed in his rebellion, royalty and common folk alike. And so it became a fear of death itself, seeking first a way to stall death and live even longer, then, once this failed, to seeking a sort of embalming process for the dead. The Numenorians built great tombs throughout the land of Numenor, houses of the dead more splendid than those of the living, thus enshrining the thought of death as a baleful reminder of their fate. It was in these days that the Ring-Wraiths first appeared. Indeed, it is said that 3 of them were lords of Numenor, undoubtedly beguiled by Sauron's temptations of long life, ensnared to live their lives under his domination for the next 4,000 years before the One Ring was finally destroyed. They at long last passed away. Eventually they fell into rebellion against the Valar and became envious of the elves and their immortality, ending their friendship with them. They then became increasingly greedy and warlike. No longer were they the benevolent explorers of old bringing light to the world outside, but conquerors, enslaving peoples, constructing fortresses, and returning home heavily laden with spoils, growing more wealthy but increasingly discontented and fearful, and their long lifespans became shorter and shorter as they fell further into darkness. While the Numenorians as a people at this time did not serve Sauron or his minions, the shadow of Sauron was certainly cast over them enough that division erupted within their kingdom, with those so-called the King's Men serving the rebellious kings after Atanamir, later to be known as the Black Numenorians, who as the final millennium of the Second Age wore on did indeed serve the Dark Lord. But some Numenorians remained faithful to the Valar and continued as elf friends, and did none of the evil deeds of their kin. Such were Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion, and many thousands with them. These were known as the Faithful, or Elf Friends, the Elendili. It was these forefathers of Elendil who became increasingly persecuted for the last millennium of the Second Age by the King's Men, or Black Numenorians, being labeled as spies with the Valar, while the Black Numenorians continued further in evil, and Elendil and his sons were treated no differently. In the last 2 centuries leading up to the War of the Last Alliance, the last king of Numenor, Ar-pharazon, became so prideful that he willed to rule all the world. He then pursued a policy of war to subdue even Sauron himself. This was the end of the noontide of Numenor, as the sun quickly set upon its former glory, and all that was left was a remnant in exile, led by Elendil and his sons, the beginning of the Last Alliance, a tale to be concluded in the next section of this appendix.